They slid the paper toward me and said I had 21 days. If you've ever felt underestimated, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside by the people you loved most, don't blink. This story starts calm, but it doesn't end that way. I remember nodding as if it were a weather update, something ordinary, something that didn't deserve a reaction. Inside, though, a quiet switch flipped. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. I've learned that when people believe you're finished, they stop watching what you do next. It was Christmas night, just past 7, the nursing home lobby still smelling faintly of pine cleaner and reheated ham. A plastic wreath hung crooked above the reception desk. Somewhere down the hall, a television played a holiday movie too loud. My son stood near the door, keys already in his hand. My daughter sat across from me, tapping her nails against a clipboard like she'd rehearsed this moment in the car. "This is temporary," she said, not looking at me. "Just until everything's settled." Everything. Such a neat word for dismantling a life. I glanced at the form. My name was spelled wrong. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the date. Yesterday's date. Small details most people miss. I didn't. I never have. I asked calmly, "And the house?" My son cleared his throat. "It's already sold, Mom." It was the only option. "Sold?" He said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. I felt it in my chest, a tightening, then a strange stillness. That house wasn't just walls and windows. It was 42 years of holidays, scraped knees, quiet mornings with coffee and the paper. But I didn't argue. I just pressed my lips together and nodded again. The receptionist smiled at me with practiced sympathy. She handed me a key card and pointed toward the hallway. No one asked if I wanted water. No one asked if I understood. I understood perfectly. As we walked, my daughter talked about schedules and visiting hours. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another room. I noticed how fast she walked, how she didn't slow down for me. My son stopped outside my assigned room and leaned against the doorframe, avoiding my eyes. "You'll be taken care of here," he said. "We'll check in." I looked at him then. Really looked. He couldn't meet my gaze. That told me more than his words ever could. Inside the room, the bedspread was thin and tucked too tight. A small lamp buzzed softly on the nightstand. Someone had placed a single poinsettia on the windowsill, already drooping. I set my purse on the chair and turned back to them. "So," I said evenly, "you've decided." My daughter exhaled, sharp and impatient. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. As if this were an inconvenience for them. I felt something settle behind my ribs, heavy but steady. Anger burns fast. This wasn't anger. This was clarity. They left soon after, claiming traffic obligations, tired children waiting at home. My son hugged me quickly, his body stiff. My daughter kissed my cheek, her perfume unfamiliar, too sweet. When the door closed, the click echoed louder than it should have. I sat on the bed and listened. Carts rolling. A distant cough. Laughter from a room down the hall. Life continuing without me. I removed my coat carefully and hung it in the narrow closet. My fingers brushed against the lining of my purse, where something important rested, unseen. A nurse knocked and introduced herself, cheerful, efficient. She asked routine questions. I answered them all politely. When she left, I sat back and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small cracks, letting the shock drain out slowly. It wasn't until later, when the hall quieted and the lights dimmed, that the weight truly hit. 21 days. They'd measured my life in weeks. I thought about the kitchen window at home, the way the morning light hit the sink. I thought about the drawer in my bedroom they'd never opened, never bothered with. I smiled then, just a little. The next morning my daughter called. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked, brisk. "Fine," I said. And it was true. I'd slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes after a decision is made. She hesitated. "About the house. You understand why we had to." "I understand," I replied. Silence stretched between us. She filled it with excuses, with numbers, with reasons that sounded thin even to her. I let her talk. After the call, I walked the hallway slowly, taking in faces, routines, patterns. A woman named Ruth waved at me. A man argued with a television. Staff moved with practiced efficiency. No one saw me as a threat. That was fine. In the afternoon, a social worker stopped by. She asked how I was adjusting. Her eyes lingered on me a second longer than necessary, sharp and kind at the same time. "They gave me 21 days, I said casually. Her pen paused. 21 days for what? I smiled. That's what I'm wondering. She didn't push, but something shifted in her expression. Another small detail noted. That evening my son texted me a photo of the house. The living room. My sofa replaced with something modern and gray. We'll bring you some things later, he wrote. I stared at the image. On the wall above the fireplace, the spot where a picture used to hang looked bare. They hadn't found it. They wouldn't. I typed back, "Tow rush." As night fell again, I sat by the window and watched snow start to drift down, soft and steady. The poinsettia sagged further. I straightened its leaves gently. My reflection in the glass looked older than I felt, but my eyes were clear. They thought they'd moved me out of the story. They were wrong. On the third day they visited together. My daughter stood, arms crossed. My son paced. "We need you to sign one more thing," she said, pulling out another paper. I took it, glanced at the heading, then handed it back. "I'll look at it later." Her jaw tightened. "It's important." "So am I," I said softly. They stared at me, surprised. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across their faces. I met their gaze, calm, steady, saying nothing more. Outside my door, voices rose, hushed but urgent. Inside I sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. I could hear them outside my door, their voices low and tense, my daughter's sharp whisper cutting through my son's nervous pacing. I didn't strain to catch every word. I didn't need to. The way they spoke told me enough. They were used to me explaining, softening, smoothing things over. This time I stayed still. The silence pressed on them, not me. When their footsteps finally faded, I exhaled slowly and leaned back against the pillow. My heart was beating fast, but my face felt calm, almost detached. I had spent decades filling quiet spaces with reassurance. Now I let the quiet fill me instead. It felt unfamiliar but not frightening. More like stepping into a coat I hadn't worn in years. That night, sleep came in pieces. The mattress creaked each time I shifted. Somewhere down the hall, a call bell rang and rang before someone answered it. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly people rewrite your story once you stop speaking for yourself. I promised myself I would listen more than I talked. People reveal things when they think you're not paying attention. Morning arrived with the rattle of a cart and the smell of burnt toast. A nurse named Carla introduced herself, cheerful and rushed. She took my blood pressure, made a note on her tablet, and asked if my family would be visiting today. I shrugged lightly. "They're busy," I said. It wasn't a lie. Busy erasing me maybe, but still busy. After breakfast, I walked the hallway slowly, my slippers whispering against the floor. I noticed which doors stayed open and which stayed shut. I noticed who staff greeted by name and who they spoke over. Older women especially were treated like furniture. Useful, familiar, easy to overlook. I filed that observation away. I sat with Ruth again, the woman who had waved the day before. She told me about her late husband and how her daughter controlled her checkbook for convenience. She laughed when she said it, but her eyes didn't. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Silence made people brave. Later the social worker returned. Her name was Elena. She asked how I was settling in, pulling a chair close instead of standing. That small choice mattered. I told her the room was clean and the staff kind. Then I mentioned casually that my house had been sold without much discussion. I watched her eyebrows lift just slightly. "Did you agree to that?" she asked. "I didn't disagree," I said. It was the truth and it made her pause. She asked a few more questions, careful ones. I answered just enough. When she left, she squeezed my hand and said we'd talk again. I believed her. In the afternoon my daughter called. Her voice was tight, controlled. "We didn't mean to upset you yesterday," she said. "You've always been emotional." I let that sit between us. Emotional. A word she used whenever I didn't fall in line. "I'm fine," I replied. "I'm getting used to things." She seemed unsettled by that. "Good," she said quickly. "That's good." After the call, I opened my purse and checked that everything was still there. It was. I closed it again and placed it carefully in the drawer. Some things were safer staying unseen. The days began to develop a rhythm. Meals, walks, conversations overheard. I learned which staff members talked too freely and which ones watched everything. I learned that paperwork moved slowly here and that assumptions filled the gaps. If you looked harmless enough, people stopped questioning you. One evening, I heard my name spoken near the nurse's station. I slowed my steps, pretending to study a bulletin board. Her kids handled everything, someone said. Lucky she doesn't have to worry. I smiled to myself. Worry is useful. It keeps you alert. A volunteer stopped by with a stack of donated books. I picked one at random and thanked her. Inside the cover, someone had written a note years ago about starting over late in life. I took it as a sign not of hope exactly but of timing. On the fourth day my son visited alone. He sat on the edge of the bed, restless. You okay? He asked. I am, I said. He nodded, unsatisfied. We're doing what's best, he added, more for himself than for me. I didn't argue. I watched his foot tap against the floor, the way his eyes flicked to my purse and back. He left sooner than planned. After he went, I sat very still. Silence wrapped around me again, familiar now. It wasn't empty. It was full of information. That night, I wrote a list on a scrap of paper. Names, dates, small moments. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. Facts are patient. The next morning, Elena returned. She asked if I felt pressured to sign anything recently. I met her gaze. People assume I don't need time to think, I said. She nodded slowly. That happens, she replied. More than it should. We talked about options generally. Not plans. Not yet. When she left, she told me I wasn't alone here. I believed that too. By the end of the week, my children called less. Their confidence seemed to be cracking, replaced by irritation. Silence unsettles people who rely on control. I knew that from experience. I sat by the window that evening watching the parking lot lights flicker on. My reflection looked composed, almost serene. Inside, everything was lining up quietly. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. Silence was my shield, and behind it I was very much awake. That awareness stayed with me the next morning as sunlight crept through the thin curtains and landed on the edge of my bed. I didn't rush to get up. I lay there listening to the building come alive, carts rolling, doors opening, voices calling out names. Somewhere in that noise, my children were starting another day in my house, pouring coffee into my mugs, sitting at my table believing they had won. I let that thought settle without bitterness. Enjoyment is easiest when you don't know how temporary it is. After breakfast, I sat by the window with my purse on my lap and watched a delivery truck pull into the parking lot. The driver hopped out, careless and fast. Life moved forward for everyone else. That steadiness calmed me. I wasn't being dragged behind it. I was choosing my pace. My daughter sent me pictures later that morning. The living room looked different already. New throw pillows. A rearranged bookshelf. She added a short message. We're making it cozy. I studied the photo carefully. The walls looked bare, lighter somehow. Something important was missing, and the fact that she hadn't noticed told me everything I needed to know. I didn't reply right away. I waited until my hands stopped trembling. Not from fear, but from a strange mix of grief and control. Letting go isn't passive when you're doing it on purpose. I typed back a simple heart and nothing more. That afternoon, Elena stopped by again. She asked how I was feeling, but her eyes searched my face, reading the space between my words. I told her I was tired in a good way, like someone who had finally stopped swimming against a current. She smiled, understanding more than I'd said. Your children seem very confident, she observed carefully. They always have been, I replied. Confidence is easier when you think the ending's already written. She didn't press, but she nodded as if she were filing that sentence away. When she left, I felt lighter. Being seen even partially mattered. Later, I joined a small group activity in the common room. Folding napkins for an upcoming event. Simple, repetitive work. A woman across from me talked about how her son had changed the locks on her apartment for safety. She laughed when she said it, but her fingers creased the fabric too tightly. I folded quietly, listening. Patterns repeated themselves everywhere if you paid attention. When I returned to my room, my phone buzzed. My son this time. House inspection went fine, he wrote. Everything's settled. Settled. Another neat word. I imagined him standing in my hallway checking boxes, believing he'd closed the door on responsibility. I wondered if he felt relief yet, or if something nagged at him when the house went quiet at night. I typed, that's good. 2 words. Enough to keep him comfortable. As days passed, I heard more through casual comments and overheard conversations. Staff mentioned mail being forwarded. A nurse asked if I wanted help changing my address on some forms. I declined politely. Not yet, I said. Timing mattered. One afternoon a package arrived for me at the front desk. My name, written carefully in familiar handwriting. My daughter's. Inside was a sweater I hadn't asked for and a note that said, "Thought you might want this." No apology. No question. Just an assumption that she still decided what I needed. I folded the sweater and placed it in the drawer without wearing it. Then I sat on the bed and let myself feel the ache of being managed instead of known. It passed. Aches usually do when you don't fight them. That evening I called the house phone number from memory. It rang longer than I expected. When my son answered, his voice sounded distracted, breathless. "Oh. Hi Mom," he said. "Just checking in," I replied. He told me about a leaky faucet, about neighbors stopping by, about how busy everything felt. He didn't ask how I was. I listened, murmuring at the right moments, picturing him moving through rooms that still held my fingerprints in places he never touched. After we hung up, I noticed my hands were steady. That surprised me. The next day I took a longer walk through the facility, stopping to rest when my niece complained. Near the entrance, a bulletin board held notices about resident rights and resources. I read them slowly, carefully, as if they were written just for me. Knowledge doesn't shout. It waits. Back in my room I opened my purse again and checked what mattered. Everything was still where it belonged. I closed the zipper softly. Let them enjoy the illusion, I thought. Illusions are fragile, but people cling to them fiercely. My daughter called that night, irritation leaking through her polite tone. "We got some paperwork in your name," she said. "You should have updated things." "I suppose I should," I agreed. She hesitated. "You trust us to handle it, right?" There was the question beneath all the others. I looked out the window at the dark sky, at the reflection of my face layered over it. "I trust you to do what you think is best," I said. She exhaled, relieved. She thanked me, her voice warmer now. When the call ended, I stayed seated, listening to the quiet hum of the building. Trust is a powerful thing when people believe they have it. Days blended together, but my awareness sharpened. I noticed how often my children spoke in conclusions instead of conversations. How they avoided details. How they rushed me off the phone. Enjoyment makes people careless. One morning Ruth leaned over and whispered, "You're very calm." "I've had practice," I told her. She nodded as if that explained everything. That afternoon a maintenance worker stopped by my room to fix a loose handle. He mentioned offhand that he used to work in my neighborhood. He named the street. I smiled. "It's a good place," I said. "Yeah," he replied. "People don't usually leave unless they have to." I didn't correct him. Let the story stay simple. That night I dreamed of the house, but not as it was. I dreamed of it empty, quiet, waiting. When I woke I felt rested. They were enjoying what they believed was theirs. I was letting them. There is power in patience, and I had more time than they realized. That truth settled into me the morning the mailroom clerk stopped me near the elevators and said, "Mrs. Carter, there's a certified letter for you." The envelope was thick, official-looking, and heavier than paper should feel. I signed for it with steady hands, thanked her, and carried it back to my room like it was something ordinary. Inside, my pulse beat faster, but my steps stayed even. Whatever was written there had been set in motion quietly, and quiet things often change the most. I didn't open it right away. I set the envelope on the desk and made myself a cup of tea from the small electric kettle I'd bought with my own money. The whistle sounded thin, almost apologetic. I sat down, smoothed the envelope once, and waited for my breathing to slow. Control isn't about speed. It's about choosing the moment. When I finally opened it, I read every line carefully. Not once, but twice. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I felt something deeper, like a shift in balance, the way the ground feels just before a storm changes direction. The words confirmed what I already suspected. Assumptions had been made in my absence. Expensive ones. Later that day my son called. His voice lacked its usual confidence. "Did you get something in the mail?" he asked. "I get mail most days," I replied evenly. He hesitated. There might be some confusion. I pictured him standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, surrounded by things he thought were settled. "Confusion tends to clear itself," I said. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his tone had shifted. "We'll talk later," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "We will." After the call, I went down to the common room. A group was gathered around the television watching the afternoon news. I didn't sit. I stood near the window watching the reflection of the room instead. People reveal themselves when they're distracted. I saw impatience, worry, small flashes of fear. It made me feel less alone. That evening, Elena knocked on my door. She held a folder, this time thinner than before. I wanted to check in, she said. There's been some activity connected to your name. I met her eyes. I assumed there would be. She nodded slowly, clearly choosing her words. If you have questions or if you feel overwhelmed. I don't, I said gently. But thank you. He watched me for a moment longer, then smiled. You're handling this well. I've had practice, I replied, and meant more than one thing. The next morning the phone rang early. My daughter. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Why didn't you tell us? She demanded. I sat on the edge of the bed, feet flat on the floor. Tell you what? That things weren't as simple as we thought. Her voice was tight now, brittle. Simple for whom? I asked. She exhaled sharply. This affects us. I closed my eyes. It always did. She hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down carefully and felt a tremor run through me, not fear but release. The illusion they'd been standing on was cracking and they could feel it. Over the next few days, messages came more frequently. Short ones. Urgent ones. My children spoke in questions now instead of statements. They asked what I knew, what I'd signed, what I planned to do. I answered politely and vaguely. I wasn't lying. I was letting them sit with uncertainty, something they'd never offered me. At the facility, things continued as usual. Meals. Walks. Conversations. But I noticed a change in myself. My shoulders felt lighter. My thoughts clearer. When Ruth asked if everything was all right, I told her, things are rearranging. She smiled like she understood. One afternoon I received another letter. This one addressed to me and copied to others. Names I recognized. Names my children had assumed were no longer relevant. I read it slowly, feeling the weight of accountability shifting. People had begun asking questions that couldn't be brushed aside. My son arrived unannounced that evening. He stood in the doorway looking smaller than I remembered. We need to talk, he said. I'm listening, I replied, staying seated. He talked for a long time. About misunderstandings. About intentions. About how stressful things had become. I let him finish. When he finally stopped, he looked at me expectantly. You seem surprised, I said. He frowned. About what? That I'm still paying attention. His mouth opened then closed. He nodded slowly. You always were, he admitted quietly. Yes, I said. I was. After he left, I felt tired in a good way. The kind of tired that comes from standing your ground without raising your voice. I lay down and rested, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling around me. The next day Elena stopped by again. There may be a meeting soon, she said carefully. Nothing for you to prepare yet. I'm prepared, I told her. She smiled. I believe you. That afternoon I walked outside for the first time since arriving. The air was cold and sharp, filling my lungs. I stood there, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet. Somewhere else, plans were unraveling. Papers were being reread. Conversations were changing tone. I wasn't rushing toward anything. I was standing still while everything else shifted around me. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like exactly where I belonged. I stood there a moment longer, letting the cold air steady me, then turned back inside. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaner and coffee. My steps felt lighter, not hurried, not hesitant. At the end of the corridor, Elena waited with a small, careful smile, the kind people wear when they know something important has finally arrived. We're ready, she said quietly. The meeting room was plain. A table, a few chairs, a window that didn't quite open all the way. My son and daughter were already there. They stood when I entered, then sat again, unsure of what was expected of them now. Papers lay neatly stacked in front of each of us. I took my seat without speaking and folded my hands. My daughter broke first. We didn't know, she said, her voice thinner than I remembered. About the trust. About how things were set up. I know, I replied, saying it felt like setting something heavy down. My son leaned forward. You could have told us. I met his eyes. You could have asked. Silence settled over the table, dense but clean. The attorney cleared his throat and explained what had already been confirmed in writing. The house had never legally transferred. The accounts they assumed were theirs were not accessible. Decisions had been made years ago, carefully and lawfully, by a woman who understood the value of protecting her future. As the words sank in, I felt my shoulders relax. This wasn't triumph. It was alignment. Things returning to where they belonged. My daughter's eyes filled, but I didn't move to comfort her. "We thought we were helping," she said. "You were helping yourselves," I answered gently. "That's not the same thing." The meeting ended without shouting. Without threats. Just facts laid bare. When my children left the room, they looked older somehow, weighed down by the knowledge they could no longer rearrange my life without consequence. Later that day I packed my things. Not everything. Just what mattered. The sweater went back into the drawer. I didn't take it with me. Some gifts are reminders, not comforts. I signed discharge papers the next morning. Carla hugged me, surprised. Ruth waved from her chair, pride in her eyes. Elena walked me to the door. "You're going to be just fine," she said. "I know," I replied, and this time it wasn't reassurance. It was fact. My new place was small. Quiet. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor in the afternoons. I set my purse on the counter and took out the key, turning it slowly in the lock. My name was on the lease. My name was on the mailbox. Seeing it there made my chest ache in the best way. The house was returned to me a week later, empty and echoing. I walked through each room alone. I touched the walls. I opened the windows. I didn't cry. Closure doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with breath. I didn't invite my children back right away. I needed space to hear my own thoughts again. When they did reach out, it was different. No assumptions. No instructions. Just questions, careful and uncertain. "I need time," I told them. They accepted that. Or they had no choice but to. I met with the attorney once more to make final changes. Clear ones. Kind ones. My will reflected who I was now, not who I used to be. Responsibility without obligation. Love without access. In the evenings I cooked simple meals. I slept deeply. I woke without dread. Power, I learned, isn't loud. It's the ability to choose yourself without apology. One afternoon I walked past the old photo spot above the fireplace and hung something new there. Not a family portrait. A landscape. Open sky. Endless horizon. I wasn't erased. I wasn't rescued. I stood up when the ground shifted and let everything false fall away. In the weeks that followed, small things confirmed the change. Bills arrived addressed correctly. Calls were returned promptly. When I spoke, people listened without scanning past me. I noticed how different the world feels when you are no longer bracing for loss. My body relaxed into itself. My hands stopped shaking when I held my phone. My daughter came by one afternoon with a bag of groceries, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I didn't know what you'd want," she said. "Next time ask," I replied, and she nodded, learning. We talked at the table. Not about the house. Not about money. About her work. About mine long ago. She listened then, really listened, as if discovering me for the first time. My son called later that night. He apologized without explaining. That mattered. Apologies don't need footnotes. I kept boundaries firm. Visits were scheduled. Conversations ended when I felt tired. I no longer overextended myself to keep peace that cost me everything. One morning I opened the drawer where I'd kept important papers and reorganized them calmly. Everything had a place now. Including me. I took a walk around the neighborhood and neighbors waved, surprised but pleased. "Good to see you back," someone said. I smiled and meant it. At night I slept with the window cracked, listening to the ordinary sounds of life. Cars passing. A dog barking. Nothing dramatic. Just continuity. I thought often about silence. How it had protected me. How it had sharpened me. Silence isn't absence. It's space. When I ran into Ruth months later at the grocery store, she hugged me tightly. "You look different," she said. "I am," I replied. I didn't feel the need to prove anything anymore. The need had burned off, leaving clarity in its place. Sometimes I stood in my living room and felt gratitude for the woman I had been, the one who planned ahead even when no one noticed. She saved me. I placed the old ring in a small box and tucked it away. Symbols change meaning. Power doesn't need decoration. On the anniversary of that Christmas night, I cooked myself dinner and set the table for one. I raised my glass, not in bitterness but in recognition. I survived betrayal without becoming bitter. I reclaimed myself without taking anything that wasn't mine. And when I look back now, I don't see loss. I see a woman who learned, finally, that her life was always hers to protect. That knowledge stays with me steady and warm wherever I go. I keep my calendar light and my mornings slow. I say no when I mean no. I say yes only when my chest feels open, not tight. These are quiet victories, but they add up. People ask how I found the strength. I tell them the truth. It was always there. It just needed permission. The house holds new memories now. Laughter from friends. Music playing while I cook. Sunsets watched without worry. I don't rush through rooms anymore. I live in them. When my children visit, they knock. They wait. They speak carefully. Respect once learned the hard way tends to last. I no longer fear being forgotten. I know who I am. I am a woman who stood still while the ground moved, who chose patience over panic, who walked away whole. I think about other women sometimes, the ones still folding themselves smaller to fit into spaces that don't honor them. I hope they learn sooner than I did that dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed. It begins with listening to your own unease and trusting it. It grows when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Strength does not always arrive as fire. Sometimes it arrives as a door closing softly behind you, leaving you on the right side of your own life. I carry that lesson forward with humility and calm, letting it guide my days without bitterness, without regret, and without fear. It reminds me daily that peace is built step by step through choices that honor the self. Always. For me at last. Truly so. That is the ending I earned. If this story touched something deep inside you, you're not alone. Subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories about resilience, betrayal, and quiet strength, because some stories are told for those who've lived them.